Okay, hey, good morning, everybody. I am off the coast. I'm in the Mediterranean Ocean, off the coast of Lebanon and in Israel, kind of sailing along the coast. And while I'm doing that, I figured it'd be a good time to read chapter 21 and 22. We're going to do two. I'm going to go a little faster so that we can get through it because it's a little bit longer. So settle in, be comfortable. And here we go. Chapter 21, a promise to be kept. We came to Dor before the sun had set, and the walls of the town were bright with its last rays. There had been no fighting in this part of the country. There was the usual bustle and hurry about the city gates, with merchants up from the south and country people from nearby passing in and out, together with workmen and peasants from the miserable hovels outside the wall. Many of them looked at us with suspicion, and many of them even made signs against evil or kissed their amulets when they saw us. But we could not be angry, for we knew how we looked. Moses had washed off some of his dirt in the waters of the Kishon, but I had not been able to bring myself to do so. So great was my horror of it. We were weak from the heat of the day and with hunger. A tall man in a sumptuous robe, with gold bands about his head and neck, and gleaming curls framing his face, passed us by. A well-filled purse hung at his side. I stared at it with such hunger that Moses put his hand on my arm. "Be patient," he said, "with such a look in your eyes. We will never find a host." "Peace be with you," said a man's voice behind us. "And with you, gracious father," said Moses, turning eagerly. "Are you a man of Dor?" The man bowed his head. He was an elderly, kindly-looking man, neatly but not richly dressed, who glanced over our ragged garments and hungry faces with some concern. "You have had a long day's journey, I can see," he said. "Have you eaten?" Moses's fine manners deserted him, and he answered simply, "No," with a quaver in his voice. The elderly man smiled a little and said gently, "My home is yours, and my wife will be honored if you will eat her bread." Moses and I could have fallen on each other's necks for joy, but we restrained ourselves and thanked our benefactor with as much dignity as we could summon. He led us down a narrow street, past a bakery and a jewelry shop, and past the public threshing floor, a bare flat stone where the farmers came to winnow the wheat and barley. He brought us to his own house, which was small, with only 4 rooms and a summer parlor on the roof, and with only one maidservant to wash the dust from our feet. His wife brought the food to the roof of the house and served us with her own hands. Never have I torn bread and onions so hastily with my teeth, or crammed into my mouth so many chunks of meat from the common dish, or drained with such relish a bowl of goat's milk. And the name of our host, we learned, was Elhanan. He was a scribe for the high priest of Dor, and sometimes made extra money by acting as a physician for the poor of the town, a doctor. Elhanan knew who we were and where we had come from. A caravan of merchants had brought word late in the day of a great battle on the plain, and already uneasy rumors were spreading about the town. "Is it true that they are destroyed?" Elhanan asked me unbelievingly. "All the army of Sisera." "All destroyed," I answered. And I added wonderingly, for I too could not yet believe it, "We were beaten." Elhanan asked us where our homes were, what our plans were, and where we were going. "There is work in Dor," he said, "if you want to stay, and my house is always open." But I knew that I could not stay in Dor. I had made 2 promises, one to Sisera, one to Hannibal. You remember those promises? For Sisera, he was supposed to go see Sisera's mother and explain to her what was going on, and also to go for Hannibal to go to Mehitabel in Tyre and protect Mehitabel from the sea people and from Achil, the Philistine, who is a sea person. There were those who said, where was I? Okay. There were those who said that Sisera was alive, but Hannibal I knew was dead. His was the promise I must keep, the promise to return to Tyre. Moses could not go back to his garrison at Megiddo, for by now Hebrew tribesmen were surely camped outside its walls, waiting for hunger to bring it to its knees, and its defenders had been slain in the battle. "What will you do?" I asked him. "I too will go to Tyre," he said at last. "Why not? It is a rich city, and I had planned to go there someday in any case." "How will you get there?" asked Elhanan. I said I supposed we must walk, as we had no money. Elhanan shook his head. "Travel by land," he said, "will be more dangerous than ever in these days. To take the great highway alone is to ask to be killed." "Surely," said Moses, "there are still caravans that we could join." But Elhanan held up his hand. He was thinking. "A ship," he said at last. "That would be the best way." "But," I protested, "we have no money to pay for passage on a ship." "In 20 days," said Elhanan, "a ship bound for Tyre will put into port here in Dor. I know the owner of the shipmaster, and in the way of business, and have done many favors for them with our high priest. It may be that they will be willing to do me a favor in return." 20 days, I said, is a long time to wait. "It could be that you will be dead much longer," said Elhanan dryly, "if you take the highway." So for 20 days we remained in Dor. To repay Elhanan for his hospitality, we tried to help him at his work, copying letters and accounts, going to some of the ships and taking inventory of their cargoes. Once at night I even went to a poor man's house beyond the city gate and held the basin while Elhanan pulled his tooth. I came closer to fainting than I had ever had before. What Elhanan did was no different from what Jotham and I had done for Ethbal, but not being a man of great family, Elhanan did not profit by it or live in a great house. Yet I had never seen a kinder or happier man. I never heard him speak harshly to his wife, and her greatest pleasure was to see to his comfort, weave the best cloth for his garments, and prepare him the finest meals at the lowest cost. He took her with him wherever he went, when not at work, not being happy without her company. And on the seventh day, which in Canaan, as in Babylon, is sacred to the gods, they would eat meals of bread and cheese and wine together on the roof, where Moses and I joined them. Moses told stories of Egypt, and we laughed and talked as we had probably never done before in our lives. But the day before the ship anchored, which was to carry us to Tyre, the town of Dor was thrown into a state of terrible turmoil. An Egyptian ship, a Byblos traveler, put into port, and its captain, without a word to anyone else, went straight to the headquarters of the Egyptian garrison. A little later, just catching the tide and without taking on or unloading any cargo, it set sail again. The streets of the town began to buzz and churn with rumors. One sentence was repeated over and over again: "The Egyptians are moving out. The Egyptians are moving out." Elhanan came home that night with a pale face and troubled eyes. "It is true," he said. "The Egyptian garrison has been ordered home from Dor." His wife dropped the earthenware dish she was holding, and it shattered on the floor. Nobody seemed to care. "The sea people," said Elhanan. I listened, unable to believe, though I knew it was true, while he told how they had already begun to burn and raid in the north, how they had landed on the beach at Sidon when the great city resisted and put it to the torch, how Tyre had already hastened to throw her gates open to the invaders. The gods only know how soon they will be here in Dor, he said. Egypt will not defend us. Her troops are needed at home, for the sea people have already set sail for the delta. The Egyptians gone, whispered his wife. I have never known a time when they were not here. What will it be like without them? That night, Moses and I stood on the roof and watched the Egyptian garrison march quietly from the city. Many people watched them, silent and unmoving. No hatred and no liking in their eyes. Nothing but wonder that after 400 years, they were finally gone. They will never come back, said Moses. It has happened at last. Egypt has lost the world. He spoke calmly, but I had never seen such a look of sorrow on his face. Will you go home? I asked him. He paused and frowned. Then a bitter, stubborn look that puzzled me came into his eyes, and he shook his head. What about you? He asked. Will you still go back to Tyre now that the sea people are there? Now all the more, I answered. I gave my promise. So that's pretty brave of Uriah to go back to Dor. To leave Dor and go back to Tyre when he knows that the sea people are in control of Tyre now. And the sea people, remember, are the Cretans from Crete and Greece, the Greeks, the Philistines, as they call them in kind of the Bible. All right. So we got to move on quick. I'm sorry that it's a little bit longer today, but we do have to get this one done too, number 22. The Scoundrel from Gaza. You heard of that one because it was mentioned earlier in the earlier chapters. The Scoundrel from Gaza. I want you to think of Jotham. My cheek is disappearing. It's okay. I'm all right. It hurt my teeth a little bit, but I'm fine. The Scoundrel from Gaza, chapter 22. All right, you heard about that. Remember Jotham. Just think of Jotham and his story, his birthright, his uncle, his mom and dad. We're gonna meet somebody. The next morning, very early, Elhanan called us and said that the ship of which he had told us had put into port. We took a hasty breakfast and made ready to depart. There were tears in the eyes of the wife of Elhanan, and before I could say goodbye, I had to swallow hard and wipe my eyes with the back of my hand. For I found that I had become very fond of these two people of Canaan. And if things had been different, I would have liked nothing better than to stay and be as their son. Isn't that something? A Hittite who hated Canaanites and Egyptians, now his best friend is an Egyptian, and he loves this older couple who are Canaanites. It makes it a little more complicated, doesn't it, about people and nationalities and religions, where the people you think are the bad guys, they're not all the bad guys. People you think are the good guys aren't always all the good guys. A two-tiered ship lay at anchor by the docks, and we boarded her. Before taking us to the cabin under its awning, Elhanan gave us a warning. Say nothing, he said, of having fought with the army of Sisera. Why not? I asked, surprised. Because, said Elhanan, the owner of the ship is on board, and he would use it as an excuse to refuse us any favor. He calls himself an Israelite. Remember, Israelite in Hebrew, same thing. Calls himself? Yes, of the tribe of Ephraim. We know that one. That's Jotham's tribe. He says, but he fears the Baals as well as any man. Has traded in slaves stolen from the tribes. Wow, that doesn't sound like a Hebrew, but he is a Hebrew. But he trades in slaves. And only calls himself one of them when he thinks there is some profit to it. Though I do not like to say it of any man, he is a real scoundrel. So he's a bad guy, the captain of the ship. For some reason, his last words startled me, as if they should bring something to my mind, but what it was I could not remember. The cabin to which we were taken was as roomy and handsome as the ones I had seen in the ships of Ethbal. It was finer, in fact, for it had hangings of Egyptian linen instead of goatskin. The owner of the ship sat at ease at the table, the master standing behind him. He reminded me of the rich-robed, curled, and ornamented man with the purse that we had seen on our first day in Dor. Elhanan bowed low to him, his hands to his heart. "Peace be with you, Joash ben Omri. May your affairs prosper," he said. "They have, Elhanan," said the man. In spite of the heavy ornamented garments and the long curls and beard, I could see that he was tall and strong, with a clever face and large, thinking eyes. There was something about his face that made me feel I had perhaps seen it before. "Was the wind strong from Gaza?" Elhanan asked politely. Then I had it, Gaza. Those scoundrels down in Gaza, and his eyes were the eyes of Jotham, except there were lines of greed and deceit around them. Surely this was the uncle, the Hebrew merchant from Gaza who had stolen Jotham's birthright. Elhanan told him of our plight, how we were penniless and bound for Tyre, and how, because of the dangers of these uncertain times, we would prefer sea travel to venturing out over land. I watched how Joash ben Omri was thinking that Elhanan was a good friend to have in the markets of Dor. "It is only a day and a half night sail to Tyre after all," he said at last. "It can do no harm to take the young men on if you take an interest in them. Though why do you?" he added, looking at us rudely. "I do not understand." Moses and I did not care what he said. We had what we wanted and did not care how Joash insulted us out of his bad temper. The bad temper seemed to be caused by something more than having to take on two poorly dressed passengers who couldn't pay for their passage. When Elhanan asked him how it was that he himself was sailing on this voyage, he flushed angrily. "Must I have a reason to sail on my own ship?" he asked. "It may be that I wanted to see for myself how I am being cheated by the Canaanites." "I think," Moses said to me later, "that it is because something frightened him down in Gaza." Remember, Joash is Jotham's uncle, and he does play both sides. He tries to be a Hebrew when he's with the Hebrews or the Israelites, and then he tries to be a Canaanite when he's with them. So he's always trying to play both sides just to get what he wants. "I wonder what it was," I replied cheerfully. "With a man like him, it could have been anything. The Canaanites may have turned on him for being a Hebrew, or the Hebrews of the city may have threatened him for being a Canaanite. I suppose there are not many he can trust." I wanted to tell Moses what I knew of Joash, but did not. I could not be sure it was the same man. Night had fallen, and we were lying in the open against the bulwarks of the ship. This was my first sea voyage, and though we were always within sight of land, it was a wonderful thing to me. It was too dark now to see the shore, though far off in the distance I could hear the faint thunder of the surf. There were the stars right above me, clear and bright to guide us, holy with the names of the gods. And the movement of the deck beneath me was pleasant and soothing. I was not sick. Perhaps the buffeting I had had in the waters of the Kishon had cured me of that. I lay on my back, my head on my arms. Now and then I turned my head to look at Moses. In the light of the moon, his face could clearly be seen. It looked odder than ever with its delicate nose and jutting jaw. "Were you trained as a soldier?" I asked him. "No," said Moses. "Schoolboys in Egypt are not urged to make the army a career. Besides, my family was poor and could only send me to a charity school when we were all warned that the only way a poor boy could make his fortune was to become a scribe." "You are a strange people, you Egyptians," I informed him. "It is strange to me that you could ever fight at all." Moses grinned. "We fought well enough to give you Hittites a good beating at Kadesh." I sat up on my elbow. "What beating at Kadesh?" I asked hotly. "You and your Pharaoh Ramses were lucky to escape out of our hands with your lives. Every singer knows that story. Moses sighed. Oh, what does it matter now, he said. We sighted Tyre as the sun came up. I had never seen a city from the sea before, and I watched it in delight as the sunlight glittered on its walls and on the ancient temple of Baal Melkarth, on its sister island. But a stillness came over me when, for the first time, I saw the ships of the sea people in the harbor, lean ships with sharp prows for ramming. So here we are, said Moses. Not yet a while, said a voice behind us. It was Zimri, the shipmaster. He wants to see you. There was an unpleasant look on his face. He had followed us to the cabin amidships. Joash ben Omri was waiting for us, looking at us out of narrowed black eyes, his mouth grim and unsmiling. And he demanded that we pay him for the price of our passage. Okay, I want you to try to pay attention to the negotiations. That's what's going to happen now. They're going to try to outdo each other in what they have. Okay, because remember, Joash said, yeah, I'll take them for you, Elhanan, I'll take them for free. And now he's asking them for money. The price? I repeated foolishly. Of course the price, said Joash. You have been a passenger on my ship. Passengers on my ship must pay their fares. There is no price, I cried. That was agreed between you and Elhanan. Agreed that there would be no price? Protested Joash, looking dumbfounded. Never. I agreed to bring you to Tyre, and I have brought you. I never agreed to bring you for nothing. I knew now why the trusting Elhanan had never become rich. I opened my mouth to call Joash a liar and a pirate, but Moses interrupted me. Joash ben Omri, he said, you know we have no money. Joash shrugged and shook his head. You know the law, he said. I knew it too, that if we could not pay Joash, we must go into bondage to him. My heart began to pound dully. This was a new kind of fear. Suppose, said Moses, that we have a patron, which means someone who looks after them, a patron who is willing to pay our ransom. Joash looked hurt. Not ransom, young man. You took passage on my ship of your own free will. Your fare, a fare, F-A-R-E, is the price of a ticket to go on a boat. Our fare then, said Moses obligingly. How much is it? 30 silver shekels, said Joash sharply, for each. 30 silver shekels, I shouted, my anger overcoming my fear. That is the price of a ceremonial garment. It is the price of a war horse, the hire of a plow ox for almost 3 years. Well, said Joash reasonably, if your patron wants to barter a war horse or a purple robe. And I realized that our only chance of freedom lay in Ethbal's willingness to ransom us. And remembering what I had done to him and his family, I could not believe that he would. Remember, he stole Jabin. Direct me to your patron's house, and I will send a messenger, said Joash. Without hope, I gave him the directions, then turned aside in shame and sorrow. He does not know me, said Moses, so he will, meaning Ethbal, so he will probably not redeem me, pay for him. But if he sends the money for you, go. It would do me no good to have you in bondage too. Joash ben Omri sat calmly at his big table, going over some accounts on a sheet of papyrus. I stared at the old pirate, hatred in my heart. They were scoundrels down in Gaza, indeed. And yet I knew that what he did was common among seamen and ship owners, whether they sailed from Canaan and ports of Egypt or the islands over the seas. And because these ships brought prosperity to their cities and their gods, all that they did was within the law, and nothing could be done against them. The messenger returned, and I hardened my heart to hear the bad news I was sure would come. But another man was with him, and my heart leaped to see that it was Ruel, the butler of the house of Ethbal. Ruel, I cried, he sent you. Then he has not turned against me. It was not he who sent me, began Ruel. But before he could finish, Joash cut in to ask him how much he had brought. 30 shekels, said Ruel, to redeem the young man Uriah Tarhund, if it is he, and I see that it is. Amosis had closed his eyes. Then only one is ransomed, said Joash shortly, forgetting the polite words fair and passage. He counted out the silver with great care, then said, the young man Uriah Tarhund may go free. I looked at Amosis, and my heart turned over. Amosis, a slave at the oars of a Canaanite ship. Amosis, who had twice saved my life. I remembered how he had said, if you stay, I will stay. I had an idea, but I knew it would only succeed if Joash were really the uncle of Jotham. It was my only chance. I spoke to Joash. Will you take him back with you to Gaza? I asked him. I would not if I were you. Joash looked at me in astonishment, and some of the color left his face. Before he could stop himself, he had asked me what I meant. I mean, I said, that there are many men of Israel in Gaza, and Israel has made herself strong these past days. Or are you planning to stay in Tyre? I would not if I were you. Oh, you will get along well enough with the Philistines, but there are people in Tyre who might guess why you have left Gaza. I swallowed hard, for I was coming closer to my big gamble. And there are people in Tyre who know something else about you too. I saw Zimri, the shipmaster, look at his employer and put his hand on his knife. I said, you would not dare kill me or take me prisoner now. My ransom has been paid. So if I do not return with Ruel, my patron will send men to look for me. The tide does not serve you well, so you cannot get away till late in the day. He's doing some good bit of gambling here and a good bit of negotiation. He's reminding Joash, nobody likes you, Joash. You've got problems in Israel with the Israelites. You've got problems here with the Canaanites. And I know something else about you too. That's what he's saying. Why should I want to keep you here when your passage has been paid? Asked Joash. But I thought that his voice trembled a little. I drew a deep breath and offered a silent prayer. Because I know who you are, I said. I know something you have done. Joash tried to smile. I've done many things in a long life, he said. What is this thing you think you know? That you have robbed and cheated a man of your own people, worse than all, of your own family. So you know that story, said Joash, and I could have shouted for triumph. I tell you, the men of Israel do not hold that against me. They thank me for opening their eyes to the evil in that son of a strange woman. You are wrong, I said, feeling a great joy for Jotham's sake. Their eyes have been opened to the evil in you. Your kinsmen returned to the tribe, meaning Jotham. Your kinsman returned to the tribes and was welcomed by them. Their chief, Barak bin Abinoam, is as a father to him. Deborah, the seeress, herself has cast you out of the tribes. If you are given to them now, they will sacrifice you to their gods. All the color had left the face of Joash. That cannot be, he cried. They drove him out. Would you like to be sent into the hills to find out for yourself? I asked. The priests in Tyre will be glad to send you once they know who you are and how you have insulted the Baals, remember the gods of their city. Or perhaps they will spare you for a ransom, a very large one, much larger than 30 silver shekels. Who are you to threaten me in this manner? Cried Joash in a terrible voice. My patron, I said, is that kinsman of Jotham ben Amram, who took him in after you robbed him of his birthright. He is a great man in Tyre. He will be glad to know your name and who you are. Joash leaned back, looking sick. Suddenly I was ashamed, for he was a bold, clever man who looked a little like Jotham, and it could not have been easy for him to keep himself safe and make himself great in Canaan. It was not pleasant to see him looking beaten and frightened. But I thought of the little boy Jotham, when Jotham was a little boy, driven from his home and people. I thought of Ahmosis, tricked and trapped into slavery, and who knew what else he had done to make himself great, so that now all men were against him, and there was no one to whom he could turn. I thought of these things, and then I was glad to see that he looked afraid. If I were to say something about all this, I said, my patron might let you go in peace. A little smile hovered for a moment on the face of Joash. If I were to carry 2 passengers on my ship for 1 fare, he asked. I nodded. The 30 silver or the 30 shekels will redeem both you and your friend, he said shortly. Now, both of you get off my ship. So wait, he won. Now he gets, meaning Uriah won. He gets Moses and himself get to leave the ship for the 30 silver shekels. But I don't think Uriah is done yet. We made ready to obey then. Puffed up as I was with success, another idea came to me, and before I could stop myself, I had spoken to Joash again. My patron will be more satisfied, I said, if you will let me carry him some of the money you owe him. So he's saying, you owe Hannibal ben Ethbal. You owe Ethbal. That's who he owes. What money? Shouted Joash, rising in wrath, so that for the first time I quailed a little. The money he has spent for the keep of Jotham ben Amram, because you robbed Jotham of his birthright, I said as firmly as I could. Of course, Jotham has worked out some of it himself. I think 60 silver shekels would be enough. There was a terrible silence, and for a moment I knew an awful fear. Then Joash turned to Zimri. Give him the silver, he said heavily, and fell back into his chair looking gray and old. Zimri threw the silver on the deck at our feet. Moses and I were not too proud to fall on our knees and gather it up, Ruel helping as best he could with his stiff joints. Then the 3 of us hastened from the cabin down the gangplank and onto the great waterfront of Tyre, as if demons were following us. Did you once say, said Moses, that you would never make a traitor? I think you would make the greatest traitor I have ever seen. My heart rejoiced, for I did not come to Tyre and the house of Ethbal as a beggar, and I was sure now that I could take care of myself in this strange new world. Okay, thank you guys for hanging out there. Typically when we're in class, the kids really do like that part of the chapter where Uriah does defeat Joash ben Omri at that negotiation, and I hope that you understood it. So now you know that Uriah gets to go free, and Moses gets to go free, and Uriah has 60 silver shekels to his name. So he's going to give that back to Ethbal when he gets there, and then he'll have 30 to kind of keep his own life going and get started in the world. All right. Well, with that, we'll talk to you guys later. I hope we should be sailing into port soon. I've been on this boat for a long time, it seems like. So anyway, I'll see you guys tomorrow. You guys take care. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.